real quick. So I'm going to need more flour. Some more flour. And now I'll put the salt in. Why the salt is going on top of flour is, it's once again, it probably really doesn't matter. But because I know the salt will kill the yeast, I make it a mission not to put salt on top of the yeast, because some of those yeast are dying with the contact with salt. Now the truth is, in a given, 2 tablespoons of yeast or whatever we're using, there are at least millions, if not billions, of microorganisms. And the salt's not going to kill anywhere near all of them, and it probably doesn't really matter. But it's like in gardening, we talk best practice, right? You can do things this way, and yes, it'll work. But if you want to do the best practice, you do it. You do want to have that focus on getting the salt as exact as possible. You'll see people recipes calling for fresh yeast. I've used it lots, working for various bakeries, and it's wonderful yeast. It works great. So I thought, okay, I'm going to give people the total experience at John C. Campbell one year, maybe even 2 years, and I went to Earth Fare, and at that time you could buy a pound of that yeast from them. And several people tried using it both ways, using active dry yeast and fresh yeast in the same recipe at the same time, 2 different bowls. None of us could tell any difference at any stage. We could not, even though the bakers swear by it, we could not prove them right. It doesn't mean they're not right. There may be something we don't know. They have to do with conditions or stability down the road, more flexible, I don't know. But in in that crucible, at that situation, there was no difference. So I wouldn't worry about, I don't have fresh yeast. I think the dry. But what you don't want to use if you're making artisan bread is rapid rise. It's kind of confusing because before they came out with rapid rise, they had instant yeast. I mean, it really should be that the yeast we use is called rapid rise, and the instant is the stuff that happens super fast. But it's not. Instant yeast is slower than rapid rise. Rapid rise is too fast. There's no time to develop flavor and nutrition. And indeed, you have to use very warm water for it to work well. And very warm water means a very warm dough, which means it's going to rise much faster, which means you don't get the time. You have to go faster. And when you go fast, you don't get the flavor and the nutrition and the keeping qualities. So, as far as I'm concerned, if you think there's going to be some time when you want to make some kind of flavorless but fresh out of the oven rolls or something, then keep some rapid rise yeast in your freezer. But write a big skull and crossbones on it for the rest of your time, because it is death to flavor. It will not do you any good at all. All right, so I now have the salt in there. And when I first started baking, I really was obsessive about trying to make sure the salt was well distributed. And as I've said now, it's simply the kneading process. I know totally we'll get it thoroughly distributed, so I don't have to worry about it. So at this stage, I'm just seeing, do I have to add more flour? And I probably do. But I'm going to see if I can get it to a rough dough. I will, and I'll start kneading. But you can see how great the scraper is, and that's the technique I really like at this stage, is basically folding, right? If you do egg whites or something, you can see what I'm doing there, It's a good mixing process. And you can see already probably why the bowl is so nice, right? It really gives you a lot of control. You can work pretty fast. I'm getting pretty close. I'll be able to start kneading this really soon. I'm going to need more flour, but not a whole lot. Okay, so we're there. The one danger of the way I teach this, which is really to emphasize the hydration, is that until you get comfortable with it, it can really slow you down. Because I'm going to get you to the point where you're going to be afraid to do what I just did. Take a big handful but I know I can look at it and say, okay, I know I'm going to need that much more to get where I need to be. It's fine in the learning process to go a little slow at first. Just do it. Go a little slow. But I'm saying I'm probably going to start kneading after this, after I get this part incorporated. Once I get to this stage, my remaining flour, to me, is no longer an ingredient. It is an aid to kneading, and that's it. Okay. So I'm going to use as little as possible. It's simply an aid, and my goal, it's kind of a game, is to see how little I can use. Okay. All right. And I still know it's going to be much more than it will be later on. And so I'm not being as precise as I'll be later on. Later on, I'm going to be doing things like taking this much flour and going like that. And that much is going to allow me to keep kneading. Okay? But at this stage, I know that's not the case. All right, now what I've done, right, is I've covered the top of the dough in flour. Okay? If I were to knead now, I'd be putting all the flour in on itself. It's a kneading aid. I don't need flour on top of flour. right? I need flour distributed well over the whole dough, okay? So what I do is I get it freed up. And see how I'm really going under quickly and really freeing it up? Don't get caught up in taking a lot of time on it because it'll be sticking as you're taking time, okay? It's a few rapid strokes, right? Okay, and then flip it. And use 2 hands if you have to. You know, I'm comfortable with it, but it's about, what you're trying to do at this point is keep the dough as one organism, okay? One living blob, and not tear it, not rip it apart, because every time you're tearing it, you're damaging the gluten. And you're exposing a spot that's going to be much wetter and cause your dough to get sticky, and you need more flour. So the more you tear it, the more it's sticky, the more flour you get. Also, you want to keep your hands cleaner than mine. I know how to work with my hands like this, but if your hands are sticky, they're going to stick to the dough, they're going to make tears, you're going to need more flour. You know? So I recommend actually to oil your hands. Once you've gotten to this stage, you clean your hands well and oil them. And even oil your scraper if you're still using it, you know? So you don't keep tearing the dough. If it's starting to tear, you need a little more flour. What I finally learned to pay attention to is my students will be kneading, and I'll say, okay, you're there, but you can knead longer, just so you can get the feel for it. And you can't really over knead by hand. If you got a mixer, you can over knead in no time flat, you know. But if you're kneading by hand, it's going to be a good trick to over knead. So it's a good way to get your technique and learn it and punch it and see how well it works, you know, and just keep developing your technique to keep kneading for a while. But my students don't get that every motion on the dough, right, causes micro tears, and so they keep adding flour, and they keep thinking because it tears that it's not, that it's because the dough's wet, not because their mechanical action's tearing it, and they add too much flour. It kept getting wet, so I had to keep adding flour. No, it's getting wet because you're kneading it, and it will get wet because you're kneading it. It's the process, okay? It's the process. So you just still stay on that incredibly light dusting, just barely enough to allow you to knead it. And it's amazing how little it needs as you get towards the end. It's just the teeniest amount. Okay, so I've got the flour all underneath. Now you see that now, it's on the outside, and so I take it, I flip it to itself, the flour's all where I need it. It's underneath and it's on top, it's not inside, right? I push it away from myself, I flip it, push it away from myself. I flip it on itself, I push it. And notice that I'm not just pushing down and stopping, I'm going across the bowl. See the motion? And it's a pretty rapid motion with the heel of my hand. See? And you can see the dough is coming together pretty darn fast, you know? And I'm sticking more than you should. It's all about, as you get your techniques, you know that you can stick a little bit, save your time, not have to clean. But as you're starting, try not to stick at all. You know, make it a goal to not stick. Just keep your hands clean, keep it dusted. And then as you get your technique up, you can throw a lot of those early things out the window. You know, it's often the case with skills as you're first learning them, you have to be much more strict with all of the rules. And then you learn where you can bend the rules, where it saves time to bend the rules. Okay? All right, but even now I can tell I'm getting sticky enough that it's time for dusting. But I know now I no longer can do that big amount that I just did. Now it's just like, and I try to shoot for the side of the bowl so the flour falls over it. Now I know I didn't get perfect distribution, so then I just do a kind of pat it around. Okay? And then I free it up, once again, quickly, one around the bottom. And once again, it's not sticking and I get to knead. Getting a little sticky. It's not quite there. Do you see what I just did? How I slapped it and how it came back? That tells you when you're done. Okay? When you're done, you slap it and it comes back, you can hardly see it come back. It comes back so fast you can hardly see it come back. And that is what tells you your dough is ready. Okay? At the other end, when it's time to bake your dough, you do a similar thing. It's way more gentle because your dough now has been rising and there's a whole lot of air in it and it's real fragile. You moisten your finger because it'll stick to it and pull the dough back with it. But you moisten your finger and then you push it in very gently. And see, what I did just now, it came right back. Right? If your dough's ready to bake, it won't come back. Or it'll come back very, very slowly. It's the same function. Okay? You have wound the gluten up like a rubber band right now, so when you hit it, it pops back. It relaxes, right? As soon as you stop working it, it gets to relax. Okay? As it proofs, it relaxes incredibly. So there's not much elasticity when it's time to bake. So you give it a gentle push and it doesn't come back. You get the concept? Mm-hmm. So the same function, right? That the development of the gluten, right? The tension in the gluten tells you when your dough is kneaded enough, and later on, the absence of that tension, right? Our resilience tells you when your dough is ready to bake. You know, and that to me is probably the most valuable thing I teach you besides getting you to not use too much flour, because you can't get that from a book, because it doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you got to figure it out without having given you the parameters, which you can't really get from a book. You know? So that's the other thing about recipes, okay? Don't use all the flour and pay no attention to their time frames. The time frames all come from your interaction with the dough. Okay? And are totally dependent on the temperature in your room, the temperature of your ingredients, temperature of your bowl. Okay? The activity of your yeast. I'm sure different commercial yeasts have different activities. If you're using a sourdough starter, it's going to be, you know, my friend Bob Strickland, who's my assistant a lot of the times at John C. Campbell, is the polar opposite to me. He's a former aerospace engineer. And I could never be an aerospace engineer.